the sun sank on March 12, 1888, an eerie calm enveloped New England. It stood on the brink of catastrophe, but few could predict the storm brewing in the atmosphere. A warm air mass collided violently with an Arctic blast, creating a recipe for disaster. This meteorological clash set the stage for one of the most devastating ice storms in American history. Local meteorologists had spotted abnormal weather patterns. Predictions were murky, but whispers circulated about potential rain. What they failed to grasp was the chilling transformation that lay ahead. Forecasts turned grim as experts noted a rapid drop in temperature. Rain began to fall, but it wasn't just rain, it was the precursor to chaos. Around dusk, heavy droplets hit the ground, first mingling harmlessly with the remnants of snow. As the temperature plummeted, those droplets froze instantly upon contact, transforming into deadly shards of ice. By nightfall, the sound of falling ice began to echo through quiet towns. It wasn't long before it turned into a cacophony. Trees groaned under the strain, limbs splintered, and power lines groaned, threatening to snap. On the ground, residents reported an unsettling change. Newspapers from Concord to Manchester chronicled the silence before the storm, capturing that brief window of serenity. Headlines hinted at anticipation, referring ominously to a cold reckoning. Some records of the time express a sense of foreboding, an instinct that nature was about to unleash its fury. As night unfolded, the storm reached its full fury. Reports flooded in. By early morning, entire communities were plunged into darkness as power lines succumbed to the weight of ice. In just a few hours, towns transformed from bustling hubs to desolate landscapes, illuminated only by the sporadic flicker of oil lamps. Roads lay buried under icy debris, hindering rescue and recovery efforts. Yet amidst this chaos, a darker reality began to emerge. The local power companies, driven by profit, had skimped on maintenance and infrastructure upgrades. They had ignored the warnings of their employees and the public. Now, as the storm raged on, their negligence became painfully evident, and residents were left in utter despair. With towns isolated and communications severed, the fallout from this disaster would be catastrophic. The extent of the damage was not yet clear. However, people knew that they were now at the mercy of nature. As their usual sources of warmth and safety vanished, panic set in. As the storm raged through March 13th, New Hampshire faced unprecedented challenges. Survival became the sole focus. Residents tried to keep warm without power and searched for means of sustenance, but questions loomed. How long would the ice grip the region? What would be left in its wake? In the depths of that winter's night, the reality hit hard. This storm wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was a revelation of human vulnerability. As darkness crushed the towns and isolation spread, the desperation and greed of the power companies would soon come under scrutiny. The storm itself was only the beginning. What realities would emerge as the ice melted away? What secrets would the frozen landscape reveal about the failures that led to this catastrophe? As the ice storm unleashed its fury, residents of New Hampshire found themselves ensnared in a gripping nightmare. Ice accumulation reached staggering depths, up to 2 inches in some areas, weighing down trees and power lines like a noose. Within hours, towering pines cracked and split, sending the echoes of destruction reverberating through the night. Telephone poles sagged dangerously, some snapping like twigs under the relentless assault. The bright lights that once illuminated bustling towns faded into darkness, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of falling limbs. Communities had become islands in an expansive sea of treachery. By the morning of March 13th, the damage was monumental. Over 150,000 homes lost electricity, and intertwined branches of heavy ice formed an impenetrable barrier, severing communication lines and isolating countless towns. The power system of New Hampshire, fragile and inadequately maintained, buckled under the pressure. What had once been a bustling state was now plunged into a grim reality as residents huddled in the dim glow of candles, unease creeping into their hearts. A resident of Manchester, recounting the chaos, described a scene akin to an apocalyptic event. You could hear the trees cracking outside. It sounded like rifle shots echoing through the air. He recalled how his family gathered in the living room, anxiously peering out the frosted windows, watching as the storm raged on, enveloping their neighborhood in an icy grip. His fear mirrored that of countless others, as reports began pouring in from surrounding towns. By sunrise, the extent of the wreckage was unveiled. Power lines lay entangled on streets, and wooden debris carpeted the ground. In Concord, the state capital, emergency workers struggled to navigate through a labyrinth of fallen trees, many still covered in a thick, frozen glaze. The sheer volume of downed lines, nearly 1,200 miles, illustrated just how catastrophic this ice storm truly was. Emergency responses were hindered. Towns lacked the resources to address the overwhelming damages, and supplies quickly dwindled. Eyewitness accounts varied, each dripping with a mix of terror and fascination. A woman from Keene described her garden, a once vibrant palette of colors, now utterly decimated under the weight of ice. "I watched it turn to glass overnight," she remarked, reflecting on the surreal transformation. Throughout New Hampshire, neighbors shared stories of commodities frozen in time, food supplies that spoiled, and livestock trapped in enclosures, helpless against the deluge of ice and snow. As days passed, the scene grew grimmer. Hospitals overflowed with injured residents, and the growing desperation lit a fire of anger against local power companies. Many town leaders questioned the readiness of infrastructure to handle such an unprecedented natural disaster. Had it always been this fragile? Were the power companies ever prepared for a storm of this magnitude? Accusations of negligence floated through the air, like the icicles that clung precariously to the trees, threatening to fall at any moment. But these questions were only the beginning. As towns banded together for survival, murmurs of accountability began circulating. The desperation birthed a new sense of unity among the residents. But would that be enough to address the mounting challenges? What would the repercussions be for those who failed to protect their communities? As New Hampshire grappled with this unforgiving storm, the true test lay not only in recovery, but in unearthing who was responsible for their plight. Would justice be found in the cracks of the frozen landscape? As people prepared to rebuild, they faced a startling revelation. This was not just about ice. It was about the resilience of a people on the brink. How would they emerge from this crisis, and who would bear the brunt of the blame? The New Hampshire Electric Company, a key player in the region, had been expanding rapidly in the years leading up to the storm. They prioritized profits over preparedness. Fueled by the promise of financial gain, the company cut corners on infrastructure investments, choosing to allocate funds to expanding their customer base instead of upgrading their aging equipment. This decision would prove catastrophic. As the ice storm struck, trees bowed under the weight of the freezing rain, snapping like matchsticks and taking power lines with them. The company's lack of foresight became painfully clear. Outdated utility poles crumbled under enormous ice loads, while a network of fragile wires hung low, ill-equipped to handle the sheer weight of the storm's onslaught. The infrastructure failures were not merely coincidences. They were the result of years of negligence, rooted deeply in a corporate culture obsessed with the bottom line. In the aftermath, towns lay in darkness, their streets eerily quiet. Families huddled around flickering candles, wondering how long their struggle would last. Emergency services, already stretched thin by the storm's brutality, faced increasing frustration as they received no timely assistance from the power company. Local authorities clamored for answers, demanding accountability as the public's anger erupted. Residents formed groups, flashlight beams cutting through the night as they surveyed the damage. "How could they not have seen this coming?" one resident recalled, reflecting the collective outrage coursing through the community. Local newspapers echoed these sentiments, publishing scathing editorials critiquing the electric company's lack of preparation. Investigations were promised, but for now, the immediate need for restoration took precedence. Town leaders began to question, had they been misled? Was this neglect or a product of sheer corporate greed? Not all responses came from the townsfolk. Inside the corporate offices, executives scrambled to address the fallout. They insisted that their systems were in place for emergencies, but as darkness lingered, it became clear that their promises rang hollow. Those in charge claimed they mobilized crews to restore power. However, reports of slow responses and delayed action sent residents' frustration soaring. The situation escalated quickly. people felt trapped, abandoned by both nature and the very company that should have been their lifeline. In the heart of Keene, where power lines twisted and snapped like brittle branches, town meetings erupted in heated debates. Citizens demanded transparency and a public inquiry into the calamity. What began as local anger morphed into a collective movement, pushing for reforms that would reshape the priorities of utility companies. They called for stronger regulations and more robust infrastructure to prevent future failures. Amidst the turmoil, an unlikely figure emerged. A local newspaper editor, spurred by the damaging effects of the storm, embarked on a relentless campaign. He believed the public had a right to know the truth behind the company's mismanagement. The editor's determination galvanized the community and soon caught the attention of state lawmakers. A legislative hearing loomed larger on the horizon, and the days ahead would reveal whether the electric company could recover from the storm's devastation. But as the inquiry approached, whispers of cover-ups began circulating. What secrets lay hidden in the company's financial records? Would the truth unveil an even darker side to the corporation's actions? The stakes were rising, and the showdown between corporate greed and public accountability was just beginning. What were they trying to conceal? Stay tuned as the storm's aftermath unveils layers of corruption and resilience in the face of adversity. As the sun rose on March 15, 1888, the landscape was a grotesque tableau of destruction. Streets in New Hampshire were unrecognizable, covered in a thick blanket of heavy ice and snow. Power lines lay strewn like discarded ribbons, and trees, once proud and towering, were now shattered remnants. The silence was punctuated by the occasional snap of ice, a constant reminder of nature's wrath. Within days, chaos reigned. Residents felt the weight of despair as they faced power outages that stretched into days, some lasting weeks. Businesses shut down and homes grew cold. The economy faltered as shops ran out of supplies, unable to replenish stock without functional transportation. The railroads, clogged with fallen branches and downed lines, rendered communities isolated. People couldn't simply wait. They had to act, and act they did. Neighbors rallied together to dig out roads and assist each other in clearing paths to shelters. In towns like Concord and Portsmouth, citizen committees sprang into action, coordinating relief efforts. Warm meals were prepared in community kitchens, and families took in those left homeless by the storm. Every act was a testament to the resilience woven into the fabric of New England. But while local communities banded together, the story for the New Hampshire Electric Company was grim. Under scrutiny, officials struggled to justify their lack of preparedness. Investigations began, and the outcry for accountability grew louder. Local newspaper editorials roasted the company, calling for penalties and demanding that they invest in infrastructure, the very system that had failed the region so spectacularly. On a balmy morning just a week after the storm, an unusual sight greeted the locals. The bustling, ice-encased town square transformed into a forum for discontent. Citizens demanded a reckoning, marching with placards that echoed their outrage. "No more darkness," read one. "Our lives matter," shouted another. This wave of activism drew attention from state lawmakers who promised to investigate the utility's role in exacerbating the calamity. As community pressure mounted, the New Hampshire Electric Company hastily organized a strategy meeting. With activists calling for reforms and citizens growing restless, executives focused not just on repairing infrastructure, but on salvaging their public image. For them, the stakes couldn't have been higher. In a setting once dominated by power brokers, the realization dawned. Public trust had eroded. The Great New Hampshire Ice Storm of 1888 wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a pivotal moment. It transformed regulatory environments and reshaped policies about power infrastructure across New England. Discussions about accountability had snowballed into conversations about future preparedness. States began implementing regulations that mandated regular inspections and investments in resilient systems. But beneath this emerging reform was a nagging question. Would the changes truly address safety, or would profit still take precedence over people? As recovery efforts continued, the underlying tensions simmered, hinting that the battle for accountability was only just beginning. The next chapter loomed like another impending storm. How would the public, still reeling from the ice storm, respond to these fleeting promises? And what lessons would leaders actually learn about the precarious balance between profit and people's lives?